The harsh, grinding noise of massive excavation machinery reverberated throughout the barren Texas terrain, as construction workers labored to level what had previously been known as the Henderson Ranch, located approximately 30 miles from Amarillo. The month was March in the year 2024, and property developer Marcus Chen had acquired the deserted land with intentions to construct a moderate-sized residential housing community. The ranch property had remained vacant and unoccupied for multiple decades, with its primary residence deteriorating and its auxiliary structures crumbling beneath the unforgiving Texas sunshine and persistent winds. However, when ground-penetrating radar equipment identified a substantial metallic object concealed 13 feet beneath the Earth's surface, near what had formerly served as the ranch's equipment storage barn, the construction operations came to an immediate stop. What the excavation crew would unearth during that spring morning would ultimately provide an answer to a question that had tormented a family and confused investigators for 73 years. Underneath multiple layers of compressed Texas earth, remarkably preserved by the arid climate and the considerable depth of its concealment, rested a 1949 Ford Coupe, painted in a distinctive shade of sky blue. The license plate, although covered with decades' worth of accumulated dirt, remained readable. Texas, 1951. And within the Baitui vehicle, forensic specialists would uncover evidence that would convert a missing person case from the early 1950s into one of the most unsettling cold case resolutions in Texas criminal history. Before we disclose what investigators discovered in that concealed car and how it relates to a young woman who disappeared without any trace in August of 1951, ensure you're subscribed to our channel and activate that notification bell. Today's narrative encompasses 7 decades of mystery, technological progression, and a family's steadfast determination to uncover the truth about what transpired to a cherished daughter, sister, and friend who simply departed one Friday evening and was never observed again. This is the account of Emily Rodriguez, recognized by everyone as Dorothy, and the discovery that would ultimately bring her home after 73 years of absolute silence. During the summer of 1951, Emily Marie Rodriguez was 24 years old and experiencing what numerous people considered the perfect American existence in post-war Texas. Standing 5 feet 5 inches tall with dark brown hair that she maintained styled in the fashionable shoulder-length waves popular during that era, Emily possessed warm brown eyes, olive-toned skin that reflected her Mexican-American ancestry, and a smile that her companions claimed could illuminate the darkest room. She had acquired the nickname Dorothy during high school because of her resemblance to Dorothy Lamour, the celebrated actress, and the name had attached so thoroughly that numerous people in Amarillo weren't even aware of her actual first name. Dorothy was employed as a secretary at Morrison and Associates, a well-regarded law firm located in downtown Amarillo, where she had maintained employment since completing her education at Amarillo High School in 1945. Her employer, attorney James Morrison, would subsequently inform investigators that Dorothy represented the most organized and dependable employee he had ever employed. She arrived at the office precisely at 8 o'clock in the morning every weekday, maintained impeccable records, typed at an impressive 70 words per minute, and possessed a talent for making nervous clients feel comfortable with her warm demeanor and authentic interest in their concerns. But what genuinely distinguished Dorothy in 1951, Amarillo, was her automobile. During an era when most young unmarried women depended on public transportation or rides from family members, Dorothy had saved every penny from her secretarial salary for 3 years to purchase a stunning 1949 Ford Coupe in a custom sky blue color that she had specially ordered from the dealer. The car wasn't merely transportation to Dorothy. It symbolized independence, achievement, and the promise of a future where women could have lives beyond what tradition prescribed. Dorothy treated that Ford Coupe like a treasured companion. Every Saturday morning, she could be discovered washing and waxing it in front of her parents' residence on Tyler Street, where she continued to live while accumulating money for her own apartment. She had christened the car Stella and would speak to it affectionately as she polished the chrome trim and cleaned the white wall tires until they gleamed brilliantly. Neighbors recalled how Dorothy would sometimes simply sit in the parked car, listening to the U radio and dreaming about the road trips she intended to take once she had accumulated enough vacation time. Dorothy originated from a close-knit Mexican-American family that had resided in Amarillo for 2 generations. Her father, Miguel Rodriguez, was employed as a foreman at the Panhandle Plains Dairy, a position he had occupied for 20 years and took tremendous pride in. Her mother, Rosa Rodriguez, was a homemaker who was renowned in their neighborhood for her cooking abilities and her volunteer work at St. Mary's Catholic Church. Dorothy was the eldest of 4 children, with 2 younger brothers, Carlos, 19 years old, and Manuel, 16 years old, and a younger sister, Teresa, who was just 13 in 1951 and idolized her big sister. The Rodriguez family lived modestly but comfortably in a well-maintained 2-story house in Amarillo's North Side, a predominantly Mexican-American neighborhood where everyone knew their neighbors and children played safely in the streets until darkness fell. Dorothy contributed a portion of her salary to the household expenses, but her parents had insisted she save most of her earnings for her future, whether that meant her own apartment, marriage, or perhaps even college, though that seemed improbable for a woman of her background in 1951 Texas. Dorothy's personality represented a fascinating combination of traditional values and modern ambition. She attended Mass every Sunday, with her family, assisted her mother in preparing the elaborate Sunday dinners that were a Rodriguez family tradition, and was unfailingly respectful toward her elders. But she also subscribed to magazines such as Cosmopolitan and Ladies' Home Journal, spoke enthusiastically about the possibility of women entering professions beyond teaching and nursing, and had made it abundantly clear to her parents that she wasn't in any particular hurry to get married despite numerous suitors. Her social life centered around a tight-knit group of friends from high school, most of whom still resided in Amarillo. Friday and Saturday nights often meant dinner at one of the local diners, followed by a movie at the Paramount Theater, or dancing at the Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall. Dorothy was an exceptional dancer, particularly skilled at the swing dancing that remained popular in early 1950s Texas, and she loved the big band music that played on the radio and jukeboxes. What many people didn't realize about Dorothy was her secret aspiration of becoming a writer. She maintained a journal where she composed short stories, mostly romantic adventures, featuring independent women who traveled to exotic locations and pursued careers of their own. Her best friend, Margaret Sullivan, subsequently informed investigators that Dorothy had been taking a correspondence course in creative writing, and had even submitted a few stories to magazines, though none had been published yet. In August of 1951, Dorothy found herself at a crossroads in her life. She had finally accumulated enough money for a security deposit and first month's rent on a small apartment she had located on Polk Street, just a 10-minute drive from her office. Her parents, while concerned about their unmarried daughter residing alone, had given their blessing after Dorothy had carefully explained her reasoning and promised to visit every Sunday for dinner. Dorothy had also been casually dating Robert Henderson, the 28-year-old son of wealthy rancher William Henderson, whose family owned one of the largest cattle operations in the entire Texas Panhandle. The relationship was still relatively new. They had only been seeing each other for approximately 6 weeks, but Dorothy's friends noticed that she seemed both excited and slightly uncertain about where things were heading. In early August of 1951, Dorothy had submitted her 2 weeks' notice at Morrison and Associates, not because she was abandoning work, but because she had been offered a better-paying position as an executive secretary at an oil company's regional office. Her final day at the law firm would be August 24th, and she was scheduled to commence her new position on August 27th. Her future appeared bright, filled with possibility, and entirely under her control. She was planning her relocation to the new apartment, excited about her new job, and anticipating a quiet weekend with her family. But within 48 hours, Dorothy Rodriguez would vanish. Her beloved sky-blue Ford Coupe would disappear with her, and a family's world would be shattered in ways that would reverberate through the next 7 decades. Friday, August 12, 1951, commenced as an unremarkably hot Texas summer day in Amarillo, with temperatures climbing to 94 degrees by mid-afternoon and not a single cloud in the endless blue sky. Dorothy Rodriguez arrived at Morrison and Associates precisely at 8 o'clock in the morning, as she consistently did, wearing a crisp yellow cotton dress with white collar and cuffs, and white gloves that were still considered proper attire for a professional secretary in 1951. Her boss, James Morrison, later recollected that Dorothy had been in particularly good spirits that morning. She had received confirmation that her new apartment would be ready for occupancy on September 1st, exactly as planned, and she was excitedly showing her co-worker, Linda Davis, paint color samples she had collected from the hardware store, planning how she would decorate her first independent home. During her lunch break at 12:30 in the afternoon, Dorothy walked 3 blocks to Woolworth's Five and Dime, where she purchased new curtains for her kitchen windows, cheerful red and white gingham that she told the clerk would make her feel like a genuine homemaker. She also bought a small notebook with a floral cover, telling the shopkeeper it would be her apartment journal, where she would track expenses and meal plans. Dorothy departed work at exactly 5 o'clock in the afternoon, as she did every Friday. Her co-worker Linda watched from the office window as Dorothy walked to where her beloved sky-blue Ford Coupe was parked on Pierce Street, placed her purse and the Woolworth's shopping bag carefully on the passenger seat, and drove away heading north toward her parents' home. This was completely routine. Dorothy always returned home after work on Fridays to have dinner with her family before any evening social plans. At the Rodriguez home on Tyler Street, Rosa Rodriguez had prepared one of Dorothy's favorite meals: chicken enchiladas, Spanish rice, and homemade flour tortillas. The family ate together at 6:15 in the evening, with Dorothy's father Miguel saying grace as he did before every meal. Dorothy's younger sister, Teresa, later informed investigators that her sister had seemed perfectly normal during dinner, happy, talkative, and excited about showing them the curtains she had purchased for her new apartment. After helping her mother clean up the dinner dishes, Dorothy went upstairs to her bedroom to freshen up and change clothes. At approximately 7:30 in the evening, she came back downstairs wearing a different outfit: a pale blue summer dress with a full skirt, white sandals, and a white cardigan sweater draped over her shoulders in case the evening turned cool. She had touched up her lipstick, a soft coral shade that was popular that summer, and styled her dark hair with the victory rolls she often wore for special occasions. Dorothy informed her family that she was meeting Robert Henderson for dinner at the Cattleman's Steakhouse, one of Amarillo's nicest restaurants, located on Route 66 on the east side of town. Robert had telephoned the house earlier that afternoon to confirm their plans, and Dorothy seemed pleased but not overly excited about the date. Her mother remembered thinking that her daughter's feelings about Robert Henderson were still uncertain, though Dorothy had mentioned that he was very kind and generous, if a bit too serious. Dorothy kissed her mother goodbye at 7:45 in the evening, hugged her father, and playfully messed up her younger brother Manuel's hair as she headed out the door. Teresa ran after her to the driveway, and Dorothy let her sister sit in the Ford Coupe for a moment, promising that once Teresa turned 16 years old, she would teach her how to drive Stella. It was 7:52 in the evening when Dorothy backed out of the driveway and headed east toward the restaurant. The Cattleman's Steakhouse was approximately 4 miles from the Rodriguez home, a drive that typically took 12 to 15 minutes. The restaurant's hostess, Patricia Miller, remembered seating Dorothy Rodriguez and Robert Henderson at a corner booth at approximately 8:10 in the evening. She recalled the couple clearly, because Dorothy's sky-blue dress had matched the color of the Ford Coupe that Patricia had noticed in the parking lot, and she had complimented Dorothy on the coordination. According to Patricia's statement to police authorities, Robert Henderson had seemed attentive and solicitous, holding Dorothy's chair and ordering a bottle of wine, though Dorothy had requested iced tea instead. The couple appeared to be in good spirits during their meal, talking, quietly and occasionally laughing. Patricia noticed nothing unusual about their behavior or demeanor. The couple's waitress, Betty Garcia, served them dinner. Robert ordered a ribeye steak while Dorothy chose the restaurant's famous chicken fried steak, and later reported that both seemed to enjoy their meals and conversation. At no point did she observe any tension, argument, or concerning behavior between them. They finished eating at approximately 9:45 in the evening, and Robert paid the check in cash, leaving a generous tip. The hostess, Patricia Miller, watched Dorothy and Robert leave the restaurant at 9:52 in the evening. She specifically remembered checking the clock because she was calculating how much longer until her shift ended. The couple walked out to the parking lot together where both the sky-blue Ford Coupe and Robert Henderson's black 1950 Chevrolet pickup truck were parked side by side. What transpired next would become a critical point of investigation, testimony, and ultimately decades of unanswered questions. According to Robert Henderson's later statement to police, he and Dorothy stood by her car talking for approximately 15 minutes. He claimed that Dorothy had seemed distracted and a bit distant during dinner, and he had inquired if something was troubling her. She had reportedly informed him that she had been feeling overwhelmed with all the changes in her life. The new job, the new apartment, the pressure of making important decisions. Robert stated that he had suggested they take a drive out to his family's ranch, approximately 30 miles west of Amarillo, where they could talk without the noise and distractions of the city. He claimed that Dorothy had declined, saying she needed to arrive home at a reasonable hour because her family expected her. According to his account, they said goodnight at approximately 10:07 in the evening, and he watched as Dorothy got into her Ford Coupe, started the engine, and drove out of the parking lot heading west toward town. Robert Henderson claimed he then drove home to the Henderson Ranch, arriving at approximately 10:45 in the evening, where his father, William Henderson, and the ranch foreman could verify his presence for the remainder of the night. But Dorothy Rodriguez never arrived home, and her beloved sky-blue Ford Coupe, license plate Texas 1951, vanished as completely as if it had driven off the edge of the earth. When Dorothy hadn't returned home by 11:30 in the evening, Rosa Rodriguez began to worry. It wasn't characteristic of her daughter to stay out late without calling, especially on a weeknight when she knew her parents would be concerned. Miguel Rodriguez attempted to reassure his wife that perhaps Dorothy and Robert had decided to see a late movie or get ice cream, but his own concern was evident in the way he kept checking the clock and peering out the front window. By midnight, With still no sign of Dorothy, Miguel Rodriguez telephoned the Henderson ranch. William Henderson answered the telephone and confirmed that his son Robert had returned home around 10:45 in the evening and was currently asleep in his room. When pressed about Dorothy's whereabouts, the elder Henderson had sounded confused and concerned, stating that as far as he knew, Dorothy and Robert had parted ways at the restaurant and his son had come straight home. At 12:47 in the morning, on Saturday, August 13th, Miguel Rodriguez called the Amarillo Police Department to report his daughter missing. The desk sergeant who took the call initially suggested that the young woman had probably just lost track of time, or perhaps had car trouble. But Miguel's growing panic and insistence that his daughter would never worry her family this way convinced the officer to send a patrol car to the Rodriguez home. Officer David Miller arrived at 1:15 in the morning and took a detailed statement from the Rodriguez family. He noted that Dorothy was a responsible adult with no history of running away, had strong family ties, steady employment, and no known troubles that would cause her to disappear voluntarily. The fact that she had driven away in her own car suggested she had intended to return home. Yet there had been no reports of accidents, no calls from hospitals, and no sightings of either Dorothy or her distinctive sky-blue Ford Coupe. By sunrise, on Saturday morning, the Amarillo Police Department had initiated a full missing person investigation. Detective Frank Thompson, a 20-year veteran of the force, was assigned as lead investigator. His first action was to interview Robert Henderson, who arrived at the police station at 8:30 in the morning with his father and the family's attorney. Robert's account was detailed and consistent. He described the dinner at Cattleman's Steakhouse, the pleasant conversation, the walk to the parking lot, and his suggestion that they drive out to the ranch to talk. He maintained that Dorothy had declined and that he had watched her drive away, heading west toward her family's home. His timeline was corroborated by the restaurant staff, and his father and ranch employees confirmed his arrival home at approximately 10:45 in the evening. Detective Thompson expanded the search to include every road between the restaurant and the Rodriguez home, as well as alternative routes Dorothy might have taken. Officers checked ditches, side roads, and any location where a car might have gone off the road or been hidden. The distinctive sky-blue color of Dorothy's Ford Coupe made it particularly noticeable, yet no one reported seeing it after it left the restaurant parking lot. The investigation revealed several puzzling aspects. Dorothy's bank account showed normal activity with no unusual withdrawals. Her belongings at her parents' home were intact, including the new curtains she had been so excited about and her cherished journal where she wrote her stories. Her new employer confirmed that she had been scheduled to start work on August 27th and had shown no indication of backing out of the commitment. Interviews with Dorothy's friends and co-workers painted a consistent picture of a stable, happy young woman who was excited about her future and had no reason to disappear voluntarily. Her best friend, Margaret Sullivan, told investigators that Dorothy had mentioned feeling slightly uncomfortable with how quickly Robert Henderson seemed to be getting serious about their relationship, but nothing that would indicate fear or danger. The case took on additional urgency when, after 1 week of intensive searching, no trace of Dorothy or her car had been found anywhere in the Texas Panhandle. The 1951 Ford Coupe was too distinctive and too valuable to simply vanish. Dorothy's family offered a reward of $500, a substantial sum in 1951, for any information leading to her whereabouts, but no credible tips materialized. As August turned to September, and Dorothy's scheduled start date at her new job passed, and the apartment she had been so excited about was rented to someone else, the devastating reality began to settle over the Rodriguez family. Their beloved Dorothy, who had been so full of life and plans and dreams, was gone. and 73 years would pass before anyone would discover where she had been all along. As 1951 turned into 1952, the search for Dorothy Rodriguez and her sky-blue Ford Coupe gradually transitioned from active investigation to cold case status. The Amarillo Police Department kept the file open, but with no physical evidence, no witnesses beyond the restaurant parking lot, and no credible leads, there was simply nowhere for the investigation to go. Detective Frank Thompson would later say that the Dorothy Rodriguez case haunted him throughout his entire career, and when he retired in 1973, it remained the one case he wished he could have solved. The Rodriguez family never stopped searching. Miguel and Rosa Rodriguez spent thousands of dollars they could barely afford hiring private investigators, following up on tips that inevitably led nowhere, and driving hundreds of miles to investigate reported sightings that always turned out to be other young women in other blue cars. Every time an unidentified body was discovered, anywhere in Texas or the surrounding states, the family would receive a dreaded phone call asking them to provide dental records or identifying information, only to learn that it wasn't Dorothy. Rosa Rodriguez kept Dorothy's bedroom exactly as her daughter had left it on that Friday evening in August of 1951. The yellow cotton dress Dorothy had worn to work still hung in the closet. The Woolworth's shopping bag containing the red and white gingham curtains sat on the dresser, never hung in the apartment Dorothy would never occupy. The notebook with the floral cover, meant to be an apartment journal, remained blank except for Dorothy's name, written carefully on the first page. The family's grief manifested in different ways. Miguel Rodriguez became obsessed with the Henderson family, convinced that Robert Henderson knew more than he had told investigators. He would drive out to the Henderson ranch and sit in his car on the access road, watching the property for hours, hoping to see something that would provide answers. The police eventually had to warn him about harassment, and the Henderson family obtained a restraining order in 1954. Dorothy's younger sister, Teresa, who had been 13 years old when her beloved older sister vanished, struggled with survivor's guilt and depression throughout her teenage years. She had been the last family member to see Dorothy alive, sitting in that sky-blue Ford Coupe in the driveway, receiving a promise that she would learn to drive it someday. Teresa never learned to drive, couldn't bear to get behind the wheel of any car, and would later tell her own children that something inside her had broken the night Dorothy didn't come home. The case generated periodic renewed interest over the decades. In 1965, a true crime magazine featured Dorothy's disappearance in an article titled "The Girl Who Drove into Nowhere," complete with an artist's rendering of Dorothy and her car. The story brought hundreds of new tips, but none proved credible. In 1983, when DNA testing was beginning to revolutionize criminal investigations, Dorothy's family provided samples, hoping that advancing technology might somehow help identify remains if they were ever found. Robert Henderson married in 1955 and moved to Oklahoma, where he started his own ranching operation far from Amarillo, and the questions that had followed him for years. Though he was never officially cleared as a suspect, the lack of any physical evidence linking him to Dorothy's disappearance meant he was never charged. He died in 1998, taking whatever knowledge he had about that August night to his grave. William Henderson, Robert's father, continued operating the family ranch through the 1960s and early 1970s, but the property gradually fell into decline. The cattle operation became less profitable as larger corporate ranches dominated the market, and after William's death in 1976, the property passed to distant relatives who had no interest in ranching. The main house was abandoned in 1982, and the outbuildings slowly collapsed under decades of harsh Texas weather. By the 1990s, The Henderson Ranch had become a local curiosity. 20,000 acres of prime Texas Panhandle land sitting empty and unused, slowly returning to its natural state. Trespassers occasionally explored the EBE, abandoned buildings, and local teenagers told ghost stories about the place, some of which had become conflated with the Dorothy Rodriguez disappearance. There were rumors of a young woman's ghost seen wandering the property, of a phantom blue car that appeared on moonless nights, of mysterious lights in the ruins of the old barn. Miguel Rodriguez died in 1989 at the age of 73 years old, having spent 38 years searching for his daughter. Rosa followed him in 1995. Her last words reportedly being a prayer that she would finally see Dorothy again in heaven. Their sons, Carlos and Manuel, continued to keep Dorothy's memory alive, but as they entered their 70s and 80s, the active search became more about preserving her story than finding new leads. Teresa Rodriguez, who had married and taken the name Teresa Martinez, became an advocate for missing persons' families, using her sister's case to push for better investigation, protocols, and support systems. She testified before the Texas legislature in 2003 about the need for cold case units with dedicated funding and modern forensic resources. When she died in 2019 at the age of 81 years old, her obituary requested that donations be made to the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System in memory of her sister, Dorothy. By 2024, everyone who had known Dorothy Rodriguez personally was deceased. Her siblings Carlos and Manuel had both passed away in the early 2000s. The case had become a historical curiosity, featured occasionally in true crime podcasts and local history articles. But with no living witnesses and no new leads, it seemed destined to remain forever unsolved. The Henderson Ranch property had changed hands several times through inheritance and tax sales, and the current owner, developer Marcus Chen, had purchased it in 2023 with plans to finally put the land to productive use. Marcus Chen had never heard of Dorothy Rodriguez when he purchased the former Henderson Ranch property in November of 2023. The 42-year-old developer from Dallas saw only the potential for a modest residential development that would serve Amarillo's growing population. The location was ideal, close enough to the city for convenient commuting, but far enough out to offer the space and quiet that many families desired. Chen hired Southwest construction services to clear the property and prepare it for development. The first phase involved demolishing the dangerous ruins of the old ranch buildings and conducting a thorough survey of the land to identify any potential issues with soil stability, underground utilities, or environmental concerns that might complicate construction. On March 18, 2024, survey technician Jennifer Davis was operating ground-penetrating radar equipment near the location of what had once been the ranch's equipment barn. The ground-penetrating radar technology, which uses radar pulses to image the subsurface, showed typical readings for most of the property: soil, rock, and the occasional piece of old farm equipment or debris left from the ranch's operational years. But at approximately 10:30 in the morning, Jennifer's equipment registered an anomaly. 13 feet below the surface, the radar showed a large metallic object with dimensions that didn't match any natural formation or typical buried debris. The object measured approximately 15 feet long by 6 feet wide, dimensions that immediately suggested a vehicle. Jennifer called her supervisor, Robert Kim, who arrived within the hour with additional equipment. Multiple scans confirmed the presence of a large metallic object buried at extraordinary depth in soil that showed signs of deliberate excavation and backfilling. The location was suspicious, not in a natural depression where a vehicle might have accidentally ended up, but in a spot that appeared to have been specifically chosen and carefully concealed. Marcus Chen was notified immediately, and after consulting with his legal team, he made the decision to contact the Potter County Sheriff's Department before proceeding with any excavation. The property's history and the unusual nature of the find suggested that this might be related to criminal activity, and Chen wanted to ensure everything was handled properly. Sheriff Maria Gonzalez arrived at the site on March 19th with a team that included the county's forensic investigator and a representative from the Texas Rangers Cold Case Unit. The Rangers maintained an extensive database of unsolved cases, and when the preliminary scans suggested a buried vehicle from approximately the 1940s or 1950s, one name immediately came up: Dorothy Rodriguez and her 1949 Ford Coupe that had vanished in August of 1951. The excavation began on March 20, 2024, and was conducted with painstaking care. Heavy equipment removed the top layers of soil, but as the dig approached the depth where the vehicle was located, forensic teams took over with hand tools to ensure no evidence was damaged or lost. News of the discovery had leaked to local media, and by the second day of excavation, television crews and reporters had gathered along the property's access road, cameras trained on the growing pit in the Texas soil. On the afternoon of March 22nd, 73 years, 7 months, and 10 days after Dorothy Rodriguez had driven away from Cattleman's Steakhouse, her sky-blue 1949 Ford Coupe emerged from its grave. Despite decades underground, the dry Texas soil and the depth of the burial had preserved the vehicle in remarkable condition. The distinctive color was still visible under layers of compacted earth. The license plate, Texas 1951, was still attached to the rear bumper. But it was what forensic investigators found inside the vehicle that transformed the excavation from a remarkable archaeological discovery into a homicide investigation. The driver's seat contained skeletal remains that preliminary examination suggested were those of a young adult female. The remains were positioned behind the steering wheel, hands still gripping what was left of the leather-wrapped rim. Forensic anthropologist Dr. Rachel Foster, who arrived from Austin to examine the remains in situ, noted several critical details. The victim appeared to have suffered blunt force trauma to the skull. The positioning of the remains and the condition of the vehicle's interior suggested that the victim had been placed in the car after death, arranged to look as if she had been driving when the vehicle was buried. Most chillingly, analysis of the surrounding soil revealed that the pit had been excavated using heavy machinery, likely the ranch's own equipment, and that the burial would have required several hours of work and access to professional-grade construction equipment. This was not a spontaneous crime or an attempt to hide an accident. This was premeditated, carefully planned, and executed by someone with resources, privacy, and the ability to move earth on a massive scale. Forensic teams also discovered personal effects in the car that had been preserved by the sealed environment: a white cardigan sweater, fragments of a pale blue dress, white sandals, and a small purse containing Dorothy's driver's license, $12 in cash, and a tube of coral-colored lipstick. The belongings matched exactly what Dorothy had been wearing the night she disappeared, according to her family's description from 73 years earlier. The discovery made international headlines. Missing since 1951. Woman and car found buried at Texas ranch, ran in newspapers across the country and around the world. The image of the E20 sky-blue Ford Coupe being lifted from its 13-foot grave became one of the most shared photographs of 2024. A haunting reminder of a young woman's life cut short, and a family's decades of unanswered questions finally coming to an end. The forensic analysis conducted over the following months confirmed what Dorothy's family had feared for 73 years. DNA extracted from the skeletal remains was matched to samples provided by Dorothy's great-nieces and great-nephews, the grandchildren of her siblings Carlos and Manuel, confirming beyond any doubt that the body in the sky-blue Ford Coupe was Emily Dorothy Rodriguez. After 7 decades of searching, the family finally had an answer to where Dorothy had gone that August night in 1951. But knowing where Dorothy had been all these years did not answer the question of how she had gotten there, or who was responsible for her death. The medical examiner determined that Dorothy had died from blunt force trauma to the back of her skull, consistent with being struck by a heavy object. However, after 73 years underground, the evidence had degraded to the point where determining the exact weapon or circumstances became impossible. The trauma could have resulted from an assault, an accidental fall, or even a vehicle-related incident. There was simply no way to know with certainty. Forensic teams meticulously examined the burial site and the vehicle, but time had erased most potential evidence. Any fingerprints, DNA from a potential perpetrator, or trace evidence that might have existed in 1951 had long since degraded beyond recovery. The dry Texas soil had preserved the car, and Dorothy's remains remarkably well, but it could not preserve the microscopic clues that modern forensic science might have used to solve the case. The most frustrating aspect of the investigation was the complete absence of living witnesses. Robert Henderson had died in 1998. William Henderson had passed in 1976. The ranch employees who had worked there in 1951 were all deceased. Detective Frank Thompson, who had led the original investigation, had died in 1989. Even Dorothy's parents and most of her siblings were gone, unable to see the closure they had desperately sought. Investigators developed theories based on the available evidence. The location of the burial, on the Henderson Ranch, property, and the depth and precision of the excavation suggested access to heavy equipment and intimate knowledge of the property. The fact that Dorothy's car had been buried with her suggested an attempt to make both disappear permanently. Robert Henderson remained a person of interest, given that he was the last person known to have seen Dorothy alive, but without concrete evidence or testimony, it remained only speculation. Some investigators theorized that Dorothy had gone to the ranch that night, despite her family's belief otherwise. Others suggested she might have encountered an accident on her way home, and someone with access to the Henderson property had discovered her, and, for reasons unknown, chose to conceal her death rather than report it. A few even proposed that Dorothy's death might have been unrelated to the Hendersons, and that someone had simply used the remote ranch property as a convenient burial location. The truth is that after 73 years, with all potential witnesses deceased and physical evidence degraded beyond usefulness, the exact circumstances of Dorothy Rodriguez's death will likely never be known. The case file remains open, classified as an unsolved homicide, a permanent reminder that not every mystery can be solved, no matter how advanced our technology becomes. Dorothy Rodriguez was laid to rest beside her parents at St. Mary's Catholic Cemetery in Amarillo on June 15, 2024. Her beloved Ford Coupe, after being processed as evidence, was donated to the Panhandle Plains Historical Museum, where it stands as a memorial to a young woman whose life was cut tragically short, and whose death remains an enduring mystery. For Dorothy's surviving family members, her great-nieces and great-nephews, and even a few great-great-grandchildren of her siblings who had grown up hearing stories about their missing great-aunt, the discovery brought a bittersweet closure. They finally knew where Dorothy had been for 73 years, and they could properly lay her to rest. But the questions of who took her life and why would remain forever unanswered, ghosts that would haunt the case for as long as people remembered the young woman who drove away one August night in 1951 and vanished into silence. The girl who drove into nowhere had finally come home, but the truth of what happened to her remained buried as deeply as her car had been, lost to time, decay, and the silence of the EBE dead.